See, just get my slides up. Hopefully, Kate, can you give me the thumbs up if they're okay? You can see my slides. There it is, thank you. So yeah, thank you to both Kate and Sue for inviting me to share this details about this research that we've done, and thank you all for joining. Lucy, I can still see you cycling away. I'm going to in my screen. There you go. So yeah, so we conducted this piece of research back in the summer. And we had over 5,000 responses to an online survey that was shared across about 15 different NGBs, so across a variety of different sports, from netball to hockey to archery to orienteering, so a really wide range of sports. And the research focused in on women's sporting journeys throughout all of their life stages. So today's session I'm going to cover is the kind of key opportunity that we believe there is following this piece of research. We'll look over some of the key findings, hopefully hear about different people's sporting journeys, and then I'll hone in on some key takeaways and then some actions for change, which I'm hoping everyone can take away at least one or two of those actions and implement it in the area that they work in. And then at the end, there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers. So pop those in the chat if you have them throughout the session. So the key kind of takeaway from the research. So we all know the situation. We all know 13.9 million women are not active enough. We all know that women are less active than men and that women's activity levels decrease with age. And what our piece of research looked at, so we looked at, it was mostly women who were already engaged in sport. So it wasn't a study that looked at inactive women. It was those who were already, I suppose, engaged with their NGB as a current participant or a lapsed participant. But what we found was that 48% of women took at least one break from their sport during their life stage. And that could be from age 18 up to age 55. But at some point, 48% took at least one break. And then if we look at that combined with the number of women who are participating in a minimum of 2 sessions a week of moderate intensity, if we apply that percentage, it actually equates to 8.3 million women who are potentially likely to take a break from their sport at some point during their journey and across their life stages. So our key message out of our research and what I want to talk to you about today is how can we help support those women to take fewer breaks or shorter breaks. We know that a lot of the breaks are inevitable or unavoidable. So it's about changing that narrative from women saying, you know, I wish I returned sooner, to change that narrative to actually be, I came back as soon as I was ready. And how can we as sports organisers, coaches, administrators, help and support women to more people be saying that second saying, I came back as soon as I was ready. So I'm going to talk through a few of the findings. As Sue said, the full report is available on our website, sportsmarketingsurveys.com. To download it, there's a research store section. You just need to go there, fill in your details. It does look like a shopping cart, but it is free. Unfortunately, just the process is the same. But all the kind of key findings are in there, the full report's there. So I'm just going to touch on some of the key findings. And hopefully Kate is going to help me run a little poll because I'm going to make it slightly interactive for the session. I'm going to see whether you're able, well, test whether some people have read the report yet, but also see what your thoughts are on the responses. So this is the first question. I'm hoping you can all see the poll. I can't see it in my head. Oh, there it is. Thank you, Kate. So the first question, who are more likely to take a break from their sport? Team sports, individual sports, or is there no difference between the two? Oh, nearly there, 45 responses. Oh, 2 more. Excellent. Cool, so response, so we've got 52% think individual sports participants are more likely to take a break and 23% of team sports, and also 25% think no difference. So let's take a look. So what we actually found was if you cast your eye to the green charts, Actually, 59% of team sports participants took at least one break, and 39% of individual sports participants took a break. And when you dig down into the reasons around it, the reasons for people taking a break varied from the obvious maternity and injury to lack of time, other leisure interests. So the reasons were really varied. But I think one of the interesting facts around the kind of taking breaks was also looking at when people started their sport. So we found that actually team sports participants started their sport, most of them, 66%, started during childhood. So actually there's a longer time that they're participating, so it is more likely that they are going to take a break. Whereas individual sports, we actually found that 48% actually started in middle age adulthood, which was 36 to 55. So actually starting later in life and actually less likely to take a break as well from their sport. So second question. So during which life stage was the motivation of meeting new people most important to women? There it is. So during which life stage was meeting new people most important to women? Oops, nearly there. Perfect. So we've got, quite close. So 50% say 36 to 55 was most important, and 43% say 18 to 35. What our data showed, so what we can see here, the graph, so we've got the green markers and lines are women. And we actually, because we had 5,000 respondents, it was about 50-50 male and female. So we were able to compare the two. So this chart has got males on here as well. But what we can see, so it's this darker green box here, which is the meeting new people. So what we can see is there was a massive spike from adolescence up to early adulthood, where actually meeting new people was really key for women. And that spike wasn't as pronounced in the male respondents going between those two life stages. So really interesting to see at that stage in women's life stages, meeting new people was one of the key reasons why they kind of were participating in their sport. And you can see it does go down a little bit and plateaus out, but it does still remain a key factor for women through adulthood as well. But what's interesting is that the light green line, actually the kind of priority order overtakes. So when the women in our study were age 36 plus, actually spending time with friends and family was a more important motivator for taking part in their sport than meeting new people. So it's about that, spending quality time with close friends, families, creating those special moments was actually more important than meeting new people, broadening their kind of network. Right, third and final question. So true or false one. So true or false, confidence was a bigger barrier for females, occasional participants rather than female regular participants. And when we say occasional, I mean participate at least once every few weeks, and regular, those who are participating at least once a week. Oh, responses coming in nice and quick to this one. Nearly there. Perfect. So, 85% thinks true. Confidence is a bigger barrier for occasional participants rather than regular participants. So, what our data actually found? So on this graph, we can see we've got two types of confidence barriers. So we had my confidence to take part and also fear of being judged or not being good enough as the two attitudes that we measured. And we've got the greens are those who are classed as an occasional participant, and blue were regular. So what we can actually see is there isn't really a definitive answer to that question. It is varying with life stage, and it's varying as well within those two different attitudes. So what we can say is actually from our research, we found that actually confidence was something that affected all women. It affected them irrespective of how often they took part in sport, and also irrespective of what age. What we can see, which is, I suppose, a positive or something to draw people's attention to, is that the trend is on the decrease. So it is at its highest during adolescence, which I suppose is to be expected with body self-consciousness and, you know, all the different changes that girls are going through during those life stages, and into later life, still slightly self-conscious, but possibly more of that not caring so much what other people think of you mindset kicking in. But it is something that is present amongst all women throughout their life stages. So what I just wanted to do quickly now is just to get you guys involved a bit and to find out a bit more about your sporting journeys. So in the chat feature, I just wondered if people could just pop in there thinking back to their own sporting journeys, and based on, we've got 62 people, 48% of people took a break at some point. I'm hoping at least half of you have had a break from your sport. Is just to pop in the chat the reasons why you took a break, but also what was the reason that pulled you back? Why did you go back to that sport? What was the main driver and motivator? And I just thought it'd be really interesting just to see different people's experiences. So if you could pop them in the chat, that would be great. I know for me, in my experience, injury is my, I was going to say Achilles heel, but it was literally my Achilles, which was the reason quite a few times. Having an injury, having time out, whether that's 6 weeks or a year with knee injuries, has been my kind of key reason. Oh, Claire, you are in the other side of the group, having not taken a break. That's fantastic. Oops, so there's a few in there for confidence, not feeling good enough when you got to compete at uni level, from Stephanie. Rose, taking a break for GCSEs, A levels. Yep, it's where that shift in priorities changes, but actually it's only for a short period of the life stage. But yeah, the ability to rejoin university is fantastic. Injury, yeah, and COVID, classic, yeah. Life priorities, injury, returning for, so Rachel, returning for the love of the game and well-being. Lisa, taking a break for kids' activities, having to make that choice between them, and now returning, less reliant on you staying at sessions. Lucy, falling out of love with it, and the culture and the environment wasn't so great, but then fell back in love after watching the Roses win gold. So the power of the elite athletes and events and that kind of hype around it, it's fantastic. Gosh, so many reasons. Maternity from Sue, stopping hockey, but then took up other sports. So yeah, again, differently, not necessarily going back to the same sport. Sharon did the netball, children, injury, and then got back into the sport via coaching. So again, another example of not necessarily going back into participation, but still remaining connected in that sense of belonging with your sport. God, there's so many in here. This is fantastic. I'm going to have to read them all at the end. Brilliant. Thank you all so much for sharing those. So I think what that just shows, that kind of quick example, is actually that no two women's sports journeys are alike. They're different in terms of the reasons for the break, the motivations for returning, the times they stop start, the sports they stop start, and then rejoin, all different. And that's something really common that we saw across the research and the different stories from the women. So which does lead very nicely into there were two key takeaways from our research. The first one was literally the need to change mindsets around what the perception is of women's sporting journeys, and the need to normalize and embrace the fact that every woman has a different journey, and it could be very squiggly, from stop starting to being really active younger age, but actually still engaged in the sport, but actually not to the same amount of frequency or intensity of participation. So actually it's about reframing that and helping more people to accept that that's an okay journey. Because what we found, we looked at in the research, we also asked women to predict ahead what they thought their participation would be like in later life stages. And actually after the age 35, more than a quarter of women actually predicted that their participation will decrease. And that was across all of the older life stages. And then when you take that and look at that with the active lives data, which we know shows that activity does decline with age, what we were starting to see was actually, it was almost that people were predicting their activity would go down, and then it actually went down, almost becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what we wanted to address out of this research was actually, it's that shift in mindset amongst both the women taking part, but also those who are offering the sport, in that squiggly journeys are going to happen, and that's okay. And how are we supporting women to navigate through their sport along their personal journey? And then linked with that, our second takeaway was about reframing the value that sport can bring. So it's kind of well known that sport brings physical health benefits. But what we're looking at from our research is this actually becoming white noise, and has it kind of lost its long-term influential power in motivating women to start and continue participating? And do we actually need to reframe it and highlight the wider benefits that sport can bring? Within our research, there were countless stories of women talking about the benefits that they had, which for a lot of them were kind of life-changing. But the key thing for a lot of them was that those wider benefits linked them with a sense of belonging to their sport, and that's what kept them engaged, either as a participant or, as we found in some of those examples within the group, that shift from participation to coaching, but they still had that sense of belonging. So on the screen, we've just got one example of one piece of feedback, but it was looking at that it was more than physical activity. It was about nurturing lifelong friendships, learning about how to deal with failure, and having that kind of support bubble through life's up and downs that people face. And then the other interesting finding that we found was that when we looked at the motivations that women had when they started their sport and looked against whether their participation was continuous or they took a break, we found that motivations that were kind of beyond health, the obvious physical activity physical health improvements, so those that looking at to improve well-being and to meet new people, those women who started their sport with those motivations in mind were actually more likely to continuously participated. So if you look at the two donuts kind of in the middle, two charts in the middle, those blue sections, we can see that's roughly about 1 in 6 women with those motivations continuously participated. Whereas if we compare that to the chart on the far left, which was the average across all women, across all of the motivations, actually 1 in 4 women continuously participated. So what we can kind of see is if women are participating because of those wider benefits, they actually have a more deeper connection to their sport and a kind of a more loyal relationship and find more meaningful value, and they actually stay engaged with their sport for longer. So based on the findings and those key takeaways, we found a series of actions for change. So these are the things we're hoping people can take away and apply in their sports or in their settings. So we split them into 3 sections. So the first one is about doing the groundwork early to reduce the break length. So this is accepting that 48% of women will take a break, but it's looking at what we can do more preventatively ahead of that to help keep those breaks shorter. So the first one is looking at celebrating women who return from sport. So it's about raising the profile of the different role models within sport. So it's that old adage of if you can see it, you can be it. So if you're already participating in sport and you know there are other women who've had a break for whether it's starting a family or come back from injury or a career break, if you know that other people have gone through that same experience, it will help women to feel more comfortable knowing that they can return to their sport when they're ready as well. And an example I've seen of a club doing this really well was Cambridge City Hockey Club. They, during lockdown, during their Instagram accounts, they did 365 days of posts about their club members, and they alternated between male and female. But what they did is they celebrated every single person within the club. They spoke about their strengths, their successes on and off the pitch. So people got to know them as people, not just based on their performance on the pitch, but really celebrate their personal successes. And the range of role models that they found they had across the club was huge. And it was just a lovely way to celebrate every different woman and every different journey within the club. Another example would be to create a supportive environment. So this is how we can help women to know that the club is there when they're ready to return. So knowing that before they take a break. So the key things that women asked for as what the criteria was, or the key elements for a supportive environment were a compassionate, non-judgmental and inclusive environment. And that unbiased support, and again, it came through, the feedback was that they wanted that environment irrespective of what level they were participating at, what frequency they were participating at, how long they'd been participating for. They wanted that environment for all women to experience. And one of the things I thought would be quite useful if you are from a club setting or a facility setting is to ask those women who did come back to the sport and ask them how you can make your environment more supportive for them, and actually getting to know those people who've gone through that part of the journey to identify, it might only be small ways, but how can you help improve that environment setting so women know that they can come back as soon as they're ready. And then the third preventative action was planning to stay connected. So what our researchers found that actually women who take a break aren't a lost group of participants, but the risk is they could lose their way and not find their way back to their sport if they don't maintain that kind of connection or that sense of belonging with their club. So I go back to my example of my injuries, whether that's knee injuries or Achilles injuries. The reality of injuries is it's a lonely journey, especially for me. I play hockey, so a team sport. So my road to rehab is doing a lot of very boring exercises in my living room or in the gym, but it's away from the team environment, it's away from the club. So it's very disconnected. It's a very lonely journey. And I think a lot of players or other people at the club, unless you've been through that journey, they don't appreciate that you go through. So it's about how can sports and clubs and settings help keep that link. I was speaking to a lady the other day and she went through the same experience, and she said she stayed connected by being a photographer for her group. So she would take photos at games. So it meant she could go along and still be connected and still felt valued as part of her team, even though she wasn't participating. So it's how can clubs and settings think ahead about how to keep connected to people either on injury or taking a break from maternity. For the reason they've got their break, how can they stay connected? The second way is to look at re-engaging. So how can we, those who have taken a break and haven't naturally come back, how can we help them to come back sooner? So what we found from a lot of the feedback for reasons why people returned, it wasn't necessarily because they were persuaded by the messages of improving their health. The reason they returned was because something reignited their emotional connection with the sport, whether that was the nostalgia from when they used to play it before. Was it that something, they went to an event, like the example in the chat, they went to an event, big netball event, and were sparked by the enjoyment of seeing the Roses played, and that's what got them back. We had another example, a lovely example of a lady who did archery when she was young and much later life. She was watching the Hunger Games on TV, saw them doing archery and remembered, oh, I used to love that. And that's how she got back into her sport. She went online, found her local club, joined, took her husband along, ended up joining the committee and is now part of the archery family. So it's about thinking about how to innovatively reignite that passion that women had for sport when they previously participated. The second one was about showcasing that sport is for people like them. So within our research, we found 22% of women didn't feel like they had a sense of belonging with their sport. And when we looked into that a bit further, we actually we found that people felt like they weren't worthy enough to feel that sense of belonging. So one example was a woman who did cycling. And when they were asked, do you feel a sense of belonging to cycling? Do you feel you're a cyclist? She said, no, it's because I'm not a hardcore cyclist. I don't have all the gear. So she didn't feel that affinity to her sport, but actually she did participate regularly for her. She was a leisure cyclist, went out with her family, but because she didn't think her sport, she automatically pictured those at the Olympics, I'm going to call them mammals, men in lycra, those big crowds that you see on the roads on Sunday morning. She didn't feel like she had that sense of belonging to her sport, but actually she did, but it was just a different type of cycling. So it's how sports can help people to see that their sport is for people like them, whether they're an occasional participant or even just a kind of recreational or leisure cyclist as well. So I think imagery really, really key for what's used in clubs. And I think the This Girl campaign has kind of led the way with that work, but it's so important to showcase that sport is for every single woman, no matter your circumstances. And then linked with that is our third recommendation, was around marketing and being deliberately targeted. And what I mean by this is there are loads of different reasons why women do come back to sport, but it's about picking maybe one or two that really could resonate with a certain target group. So actually the marketing ends up being something to someone rather than everything to everyone. So one example from the research we found was women kind of in middle-age adulthood, so that kind of 36 to 55, or maybe so towards the end of that group. Personal mastery became one of the key motivators. So they wanted to take part in a sport because they wanted to challenge themselves on their terms. They wanted to try a sport that maybe they never got the opportunity to do when they were at school, because back then they could only really do, netball, hockey, or athletics, the real standard things. So they want to try and challenge themselves with those elements. So if in the marketing we can actually maybe drill down and focus on just a couple of those key motivations that are really specific to maybe a set group of people for a specific life stage. And yes, it might not bring hundreds of people to your sessions, but actually it might bring 10 or fewer people, but actually the marketing message really resonated with them. That intrinsic motivation was there, and hopefully those people will be more connected and will stay more loyal and stay connected to your sport for longer. So it's about not being afraid to be deliberately targeted with the marketing. And then our final set of recommendations was around retention. So how can we help keep those journeys going for as long as possible? I remember when I started playing hockey, there was a lady who, I don't know, she must have been in her 70s or 80s, but she carried on playing hockey for absolutely ages. So it's how can we get more people participating for longer? So one of the key ones that came out was injury support. So sadly, it is inevitable. Our bodies, as we age, do start to fail us. So injury found was the second most common reason why women stopped participating in their sport. And also it was a key reason why about 17% of women took a break from their sport. But what was interesting was that this barrier or this reason started from the group of people who were just 18 years old all the way up to those who were in their 70s. So injury is a key reason across all life stages. So what we're asking is, what can we do as sports providers to help women of all abilities, all frequencies of participation, to maintain their ability to participate in sport for longer? Whether that's education on good habits of stretching and conditioning, or is it signposting people so that when they do get injured, they are able to go somewhere to fix it rather than brush it under the rug, and actually later on it becomes more of a problem. And it's about encouraging sports to think of that is something that's needed for all women, again, irrespective of what level you're participating at or your frequency. It's something that if we supported all women with, then hopefully more women will participate for longer. And then our final recommendation was around enjoyment. So out of all of the motivations, enjoyment was the top motivational factor for reasons for participation. and it was around 90% of women participated in all life stages because of enjoyment. And what we found was that, again, it was that the motivation was there irrespective of how, what level of participation. And I think this was quite a key we found among those participants who found at a younger age they were more of a performance participant, but actually in later life they switched more to a recreational participation. But what was important is that those who were delivering that sport recognize that just because they're not in the top team or the top level, or competing to the highest standard, doesn't mean that the quality of their session should be any less than those who are in the higher performance areas. They still want enjoyment, they still want to be challenged to the appropriate level that they're at, but the needs do vary, and it's important that session deliverers reflect that in what they're delivering and meet the needs of the women who are at their session at that life stage and where they're at. And if we can keep it enjoyable, then more women will hopefully participate for longer. So it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I just wanted to finish with a video. So across all of those key insights and the actions for change, I was looking for an example of a sport that did it well, and the one I stumbled across literally does most of them in this one video. So I'm going to play that and hopefully it will work okay.
Back to netball for me is where we giggle more than we pass the ball.
Back to netball is completely fulfilling.
I have made so many new friends.
Back to Netball is a programme that we run as England Netball to make it easy for ladies to come back to netball, or people that haven't played netball before. It's a really fun, light-hearted way of them returning to the sport.
My favourite thing about Back to Netball is that it's really children relaxed. We still play a great game, following the rules, but also just having fun and making sure that we're having a really good workout while we're laughing, we're giggling and pushing ourselves all at the same time.
My role's mainly to instigate the practices that we do. I set up the session to make sure that the activities that we do are fun and that they have that sort of ethos that it brings the laughter, that they can have a bit of silliness.
The girls here are lovely, and Lou is such a good coach. She's so funny and she just makes it fun for everybody.
So Louise is our Back to Netball coach. She's wonderful at going through the instructions so that we feel like we're getting better each week. We're pushing ourselves, we're learning different skills, but at the same time it's very children relaxed and we can just have fun along the way.
I mean, the Back to Netball family is really, really good.
I laugh from 6 till 7. I love the fact that it's mixed abilities. So I'm not very good, I never have been, but I don't care, and we just have a go.
It gives us the chance to come back to netball. People that have been out for a long time can then come back and return to playing the game. It's a great way of us all sticking together and having a laugh with all of us girls, and then also just having a bit of time to get away from work, getting away from everything else that's going on in the week, just be able to clear our minds and have some fun.
It's just been good for me to get out. I've got grandchildren, grandchildren. I look after my mum, I'm a carer. When I'm here at the Back to Netball session, I really don't think about anything else.
You know, everyone's got things in their life that are going on, but they come to court and it's almost for that whole hour they just switch off. It's, you know, and they're giggling and laughing, and it is just a complete escape from whatever's going on elsewhere.
I think there's a lot of apprehension before people start about, you know, oh, I've never played, I haven't played for 10 years, I haven't played for 20 years. I was so nervous. But she just makes it so natural and so welcoming and so much fun.
A common worry that ladies have is, am I fit enough? Do I have enough experience? That's my responsibility to make sure that I can cater that session to everyone. You don't need to bring anything Back to Netball, just a pair of trainers, a drink of water, and the coach will have all the equipment you need and will guide you through the session.
So I think hopefully it was almost like a bingo session there. If we had a bingo card for find all of those reasons that we've mentioned or were also in our research, there were loads of them in there. I think my favourite one being the lady who said, you know, I'm not very good, but I don't care. She was there to take part in the session, and the coach, who said that she's there to instigate the games, and she was there to kind of push the ladies along each week, challenging them at their level, but making it as fun as possible. So hopefully a nice example there about how to put some of those findings that were in our research, a practical example of a sport that's put those into practice. And I think that is it for me. Yes. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you found that interesting. It was kind of a whistle-stop tour of what's in the research, but I really hope there's some actions in there that people can take away and apply in their sport and their setting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hannah. We've got loads of, I think netball have got about another 10 more people that are going to go and do back to netball just on the back of that video alone. That was almost like the perfect example of someone that's doing it there. I'd love to thank you, take you off of screen, so everyone put themselves back onto gallery view, or you can have Hannah on great big spotlight if you want to, but we'll go back to gallery view. Be nice to see everybody, and interested just to take some questions, and people have been asking questions, so I might ask people to take themselves off of mute and ask those questions, if that's okay. Kate, is Hannah still spotlighted, and can I? No, okay, that's just me. I need to do that myself then. Okay, I can do that. I can operate Zoom, really, after 2 years on it, I can. Claire Cooper asked a really good question about gathering stories. I guess that storytelling is so real. So Claire, do you want to just put yourself off of mute? And lovely to see you. I haven't seen you for a while either, but just to share your question if you're still on the call.
Yeah, hi Sue, thank you. Yeah, just picking up on the point about bringing some of those stories to life and connecting to individuals, and so that they can see that sport or that activity is for them. And we've done a bit of that before, but we really struggle to find those good stories, those people. We know they exist, but my question was, does anyone have examples of how they've got about that as a national governing body, really, have you had to incentivize, or how have you encouraged your clubs to bring those stories in so that they can help us to grow the game or the sport further? And thank you to those that have responded on the chat as well, but keen to hear any other ideas, really.
Yeah, that might not just be a question for Hannah there, sorry, it was a good question, but it's not just for Hannah, but useful. People want to share things in the chat area there if they've got any other ideas of what they're doing. Thank you, Claire, and I know you're doing. I know that could just as easily have been in a Warrior video as it was a Back to Netball video too. There,
it is. I think what the research demonstrated, and also that how that netball video is put together, the power of a story is so much more than the power of a stat. You could put a stat out that tells them, how they'll help improve their, I don't know, personal growth or meet new people or something like that. But actually a story, can have far more impact than data or stats a lot of the time. So definitely the way to go with finding and covering those stories.
I'm going to ask Lucy to ask her question, because her question is what I kept asking Hannah every time I saw the research as it was being developed was, actually Lucy, you're happy to answer your question, Lucy, about the difference between the genders? Is she there? Shall I just ask the question? Anyway.
Hello, I'm here. Sorry, mid-interval. It was about knowing whether the research looked at the barriers that men face returning to sport if they have taken a break. And the reason that I was particularly asking that is because in my club, at least, most of the people in the kind of more important positions are men. And so when I say, oh, we need to do this, they're like, nah, that's not an issue. And for them to see it's different issues really helps to kind of say they need to see it through a different pair of eyes. Sorry for the breathlessness.
Yes, no, we did compare male and kind of female reasons. A lot of time there were similarities between the reasons, but others there weren't. It really varied across the life stages as well. But I think, have a look at the report. There are some areas where there are some key differences. I'm struggling to think of one off the top of my head, but I will try and find some and put them on the LinkedIn group. I'm thinking I had a little bit deep dive into some of them for a particular sport. I think it was orienteering, And one of the key differences we found for them was actually reasons or barriers to women participating in orienteering was actually a conflict with other leisure interests was a high reason, but actually for men, it was conflict with participating in other sports. So we found that actually men wanted to do more than one sport and couldn't balance them, whereas women, it was more other leisure interests. So likelihood is they're kind of mums, or they've got a very active social life, and actually the pull of going to the cinema or the local theatre or the local circus was visiting, those kinds of things. Those are the things that clashed for women more than men.
In my experience, talking to individual women, it's often that confidence barrier, and I hear that. I don't know if it's just women say it more than men say it, but I wondered if that was echoed in your research, that whole thing of I don't identify as a cyclist or whatever, it's not for me, and that I've always found is much more prevalent among women.
Yeah, confidence was one that was higher across all life stages for women than men. So yeah, I would agree, that's the same.
Thank you.
Thank you. Get back to that fabulous session now, Lucy. Lisa had a question about physical activity in sport. Lisa, you're happy to ask yours?
Hello. Sorry, I've got a terrible cold, so I sound awful. I was just asking Hannah in the questions about whether general physical activity followed a same sort of trend. Obviously, She's Ready isn't just focused on pure sport; it's on physical activity and social action. So I was just curious if that kind of that squiggly journey, which I read as squidgy first of all, so that's also my eyesight, was the same.
Yeah, well, one of the questions we asked in the research during each life stage was, what other sports did you participate in? And actually other sports around kind of group exercise, swimming, yoga, actually were present throughout. And actually there was quite a big spike in the number of people who did those sports during that kind of 18 to 35 years session. And I think if you link that also with them wanting to meet new people at that age as well, I think that shows that those types of sessions were a great way for women to meet other people in a less kind of competitive way. You know, the automatic assumption to meet new people is to do a team sport, but actually then you've got that kind of competition element in there and not letting other people down. So what we saw was that group exercise was a great way to meet that motivator, but also it was a great activity for women to do alongside other sports. And then I think if you throw in the element of the importance of injury prevention, I think those sorts of sports can offer so much value to help them women stay engaged in other types of sports for longer. So I think those sorts of physical activity sports have a really useful role to play in the journeys.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Lisa. I was really surprised to see, and I have seen the research before, so I shouldn't be surprised, but that massive difference in the lack of confidence at young age and how it reduced over time. When sometimes we assume older women lack confidence because they haven't played the sport in the past, etc., and that, you know, clearly we just don't care as we get older, we just go and do it anyway. So are there any life stages that you feel we should be really, if a sport on here was really to focus on one or another, are there any specific life stages that will make the biggest difference, do you think?
I think there were kind of two that we pulled out of the research and for kind of differing reasons. So there was the kind of 85 to 35 year olds group, which was the main, I suppose, unsurprisingly, it was the main group where we saw biggest changes in participation in terms of more breaks, but also more returns for kind of various obvious reasons for that stage of life. But it kind of highlights that actually that's a key life stage to focus on. How can we help women to have those breaks that are shorter? And actually in that life stage, that was where quite a few of the motivations changed. So the motivation for competition kind of declined. Enjoyment was kind of still up there, but maybe no longer the top one. And that's where that meeting new people had that massive spike. And also other kind of more well-being reasons came into motivating. So it's quite an interesting time for changing of habits, but also changing of motivations. And then the second one would probably be the one straight after that, so 36 to 55, where the focus would be around retaining and re-engaging. So we found during this time, less women took a break, and actually a third of people returned to their sport. And then there was that portion of women who actually started a sport in that later life stage. So a lot of them were looking for motivations around health reasons, but also that trying something new came out quite a lot for women who maybe were into running, but now wanted to try it alongside some swimming and cycling and turn it into triathlon, because it's something they never got to do when they were at school. It was never, on the curriculum. It's never an extra after school club. So doing something that was slightly different, that they could do on their own terms, challenging themselves. And for a lot of women, it was something that they could do and not let other people down, because it was that individual sport nature. So I think that personal mastery in that kind of middle-aged adulthood was quite an interesting area as well.
Thank you. Jazzy, do you want to ask your question? I guess I had a question about any specific insights across sports, but do you want to elaborate on that with your question a little bit? To make that pause for the off mute, and if not, I can. Okay, so her question was, are there any sports that you've seen are more successful at attracting people back? And equally, are there any that are less successful? Which is a similar question. I guess you spoke to lots of NGBs. Are there any sport-specific elements that emerged?
I'm not sure, really. I think the ones that are doing it really well, I think the netball example with that video, I think highlights a lot of those key points in their video. I think other ones, it varies within the sports really. So back to orienteering, they actually found that when they looked at their memberships, their biggest issue was the 18 to 35-year-old group. It was a group who were, we found that when we looked into their data, people were doing it a lot at university, really social activity. They enjoyed the minibus off to an event, off to an experience, fun session, the social element. But as soon as they left university, that transportation and access suddenly became quite a barrier, because they didn't have that organised minibus, that time to go, that social element. They've now got to get themselves there, but also they're starting their careers, they've got rents to pay and everything like that. And all of a sudden, for them, carrying on participation in that sport was actually quite a big barrier. So I think it really does vary between the different sports, but that's an example we've seen with orienteering.
Thank you. Laura's just made a brilliant point there, and it's got me going off and thinking things, and that whole when we're younger, we're on a pathway, like that whole, wherever they come into it, you're on an elite pathway to something. And I think by the time you get to the stage that I'm now going back to walking, netball and swimming, I'm not on a pathway to anywhere other than enjoying it and being with people and all the amazing stuff that comes from being part of the sport. And I do wonder, it's a very anecdotal from a netball point of view, we're not only talking about netball here, but we've established a netball club in Windsor that's really about participation and getting more girls involved. But there's still that whole wanting to win and wanting them to progress and be in a league that takes them somewhere, rather than just a league where they have fun. So there's that balance, isn't there, at the younger age of you're on a part, and the NGB's pathway to something, which makes many girls feel they lack confidence because they don't have that skill base. It's a really interesting conundrum almost, isn't it?
And I think that links back to our key takeaway about embracing kind of and celebrating those squiggly journeys. If young people think the only sports journey is to go on that, jump on that performance pathway, then that is going to fuel those low self-confidence barriers. But if there are more role models or more examples out there that it's more that participation, it's just that taking part, it's just showing up as and when you can, is a perfectly acceptable and an okay way to participate in sport, hopefully that might help reduce some of those confidence barriers, but hopefully lay a better foundation for people to participate as a more of a kind of recreational level from the start.
And I think Louise is just, as Louisa would obviously in that coaching space, but absolutely that whole female coaches to attract other women to play and participate, but also that women dropping out of sport. Obviously, earlier we spoke about that connection, not when you're injured maybe, but coming back as a coach, volunteering as a coach, that ability to stay connected with the sport is so key. And I think that's a whole other piece of research for you to do, but definitely that whole way you're not lost to the sport, you then become a volunteer and you work as an official or a coach or within the sport some way. I think that's so important to do, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. Any other questions I love that, Kat. I think people have tried that. Kat says, can we have a national try it out week where NGVs create a kind of festival type thing? I think there have been people have tried that in the past in different ways and different routes, but absolutely, I think for me it's that piece of all ages, isn't it, that I do think there's a lot to consider in terms of a lifetime of activity, whereas much is often focused on a specific age group of young people or university students or older people too. Are there any other reading questions here? We've got 3 more minutes. Any other? Oh, look, see, Sue Story, we've got a festival. From this call, we've created a festival, a national festival of sport linked to the Commonwealth Games. I love that. See, it's very powerful here. We've also got a lovely link in there from Lucy. So if anybody wants to play back to netball, we've almost got our a whole league created from the school too. So there's a link in there too. Yeah, I'm gonna. Is there anybody else who's got another question that I've missed? To take yourself off of mute. I know that somebody asked a little bit around workplaces and whether workplaces can do more in terms of encouraging employees or making it accessible to employees. It's my general statement. That wasn't a question for you, Hannah, whether you have any thoughts on that at all.
No, but workplace health, there's so many different projects and things around there. I remember we did one when at Surrey University. It was really, really popular with staff. And actually that competition element, whilst our research found that the competition element kind of declined, in that project, competition was so key between departments, between team members. I remember some people, very, very keen people in the office trying to get people about one guy got banished from the team because he wasn't active enough, the poor guy. But yeah, definitely workplace has some great programs out there.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for putting everything together for us, Hannah. Really, really appreciate that. We will send a link round after this to everybody that's on the call with the details of the research again. With we won't share the emails of who's on the call, but we'll send the names of the people that were on this call if you want to make connections and link up. And also with Hannah's contact details, so you can link into her there too. And I'm sure we'll see some of you at other events in the future. But thank you so much, Hannah. Really appreciate your time. Thank you to everyone that's been on the call, and hopefully we'll see you on a networking call or another webinar again soon. So thank you so much to everybody.